Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. In this episode, we're going to have a look at the air defense network of the Russian Federation. The map that you see in front of you was created before the start of ongoing hostilities. Now, the question is has this changed much, or is the overall situation in terms of the composition of Russian force construct, air defense force construct, relatively the same? And I think it's been modified to some extent, while at the same time probably very much as you see it here. Obviously, it could also increase in strength as well, and you can see, and I would assume, that they have moved air defense regiments closer to the border with Ukraine. But this can also kind of give you an idea of how the Ukrainians were able to hit targets closer to the border of Ukraine and Russia. A lot of times when we talk about the Russian air defense network, we think that Russia has the ability to defend all of its airspace. And in all probability, it does to some extent. But all Russian airspace and all Russian territory is not defended the same. And what we're looking at for the most part is the disposition of systems such as S-300 and S-400. These weapon systems, these air defense weapon systems, normally will either come in a quad launch system that has 4 long-range air defense missiles that can reach out as far as 200 miles. And again, some of those would be larger, slower-moving targets. And then it has more maneuverable missiles as well, in which they can quad pack in each of those 4 silos, 16 total missiles. And those are more for short-range targets, medium-range targets out to 20 to 60 miles. But if you look, Russia really is focused on defending Moscow. If you look at, again, the disposition of their forces prior to hostilities, the vast majority of their air defense brigades and regiments were really focused on that central industrial zone around Moscow. And if you click on each one of each one of these regiments are of varying sizes. So they're not all the same in terms of their force makeup. So if we go into this, the 93rd Anti-Aircraft Regiment, which is just to the west of Moscow, you can see that it has 16 S-400 surface-to-air missile systems, 12 S-300 PM surface-to-air missile systems, and 6 of the very short-range Pantsir S-1 missile systems. Now, what does that mean? So 16 S-400s would likely mean 2 battalion sets of S-400s, and there are essentially 8 of these quad launching S-400 systems in each battalion. So you have 2 battalion sets. So in the case of having 16 S-400 missiles, you're looking at 60-plus long-range surface-to-air missiles, or if they had used the shorter range and did the quad packing, you're looking at 256, what would essentially be medium-range missiles out to 22, possibly as far as 60 miles in range. So a very, very robust air defense network around Moscow. As you can see here, the 549th, you have 16 S-400s. So again, you would just multiply 16 times 4 or 16 times 16, and then you would have your the ready to fire missiles in that regiment. And obviously, another 6 of the short range systems defending that those 2 battalion sets that are there. You go kind of, when we work our way to in a counterclockwise fashion, you have the 612 And this is a larger force right here, obviously, with 36 S-300 PMs. So these are the later developed S-300 missiles. Again, not as advanced as the S-400s or even the S-500s, which I believe they have fielded. So there is elements of the S-500 that is out there. And then finally we go down here to the southwest, the 202. You have 24 S-300 V4s just to kind of like the southeast. That really doesn't give you too much of a force makeup, but it's safe to assume it's relatively the same as many of these regiments, anywhere from 16 on up to 30 plus weapon systems. So here you have 16 S-400s, 8 S-300s, so you 2 battalion sets of S-400s, 1 battalion set of S-300 PMs. 16 S-300s. So again, when I say 16 S-300s, you're either going to multiply 16 times 16 and get 256 short-range missiles, or 16 times 4, and you're going to get 64 long-range missiles, depending on the mission set. And then finally, we'll get up to the north, 24 S-300 PMs. In that case, again, you're going 24 times 4, and you have 96 ready-to-fire missiles. And to the north, 16 S-400s and 6 Pantsers. But that's the most densest air defense environment probably in the world at this point. So you can see, but if you move south towards the Ukrainian border, not much there. Now, obviously, the Russians have probably moved forces, or we know beyond a shadow of a doubt, there are now S-400s and S-300s operating closer to the Ukrainian border. Now, they pull those forces out of near Moscow, difficult to say. If you go to this area here, just to the east and northeast of Belgorod, you have 16 S-300 PM2s. So when you see that the Ukrainians were able to hit targets near Belgorod, they were able to possibly hit targets near Bryansk and other places as well. Again, the air defense environment within 200 miles of the Ukrainian border, it's just not the same in terms of force density as you would see near Moscow. Now, yes, obviously, if aircraft were to try to approach Moscow, or there were to be a cruise missile attack on Moscow, it would have to be a high numerical attack in order to be able to penetrate Moscow, given quite literally there are hundreds of ready-to-fire missiles around Moscow. The second most defended airspace in Russia is up towards St. Petersburg. But again, nothing in comparison when you look at the area around Moscow. So St. Petersburg to the northwest, again, S-400s, 16 S-400s, probably 16 to 24, 2 to 3 battalion sets in this one. S-400s, unknown, 16 S-400s. But that's not where, obviously, the Ukrainians have launched attacks against the Russians. They've launched attacks in areas where, again, the force density in the air defense environment in this area is just not the same as what you would see near Moscow. If we go further south, near Sevastopol, 2 battalions of S-400s. Now, we know that the Ukrainians were able to successfully launch some sort of attack against at least 2 air bases in Crimea. Now, we haven't heard about new strikes taking place, so it is possible that the Russians have either increased their capability or on a much heightened state of alert against these Ukrainian cruise missiles, or they have adapted their radar systems to detect some of these systems that the Ukrainians have fired into Crimea in the past. And if you go over towards Krasnodar, again, 16 S-400s, 6 Pantsires, 24 S-300 V4s, more medium range system than longer range. But again, you can kind of see the force makeup and density. And there's been the question, what would happen if the United States were to launch an air campaign against Russia? Well, it just wouldn't be, you wouldn't just be seeing an air campaign. There would be other issues at hand too. You would see warfare taking place within the sea domain, and the biggest problem for the United States in terms of targeting, say, areas near Moscow, again, is that force density. In all probability, you would not see U.S. F-35s, F-22s. Well, you wouldn't really see F-22s unless they were doing some sort of escort mission, or B-2 stealth bomber operating directly over Moscow. In all likelihood, everything that the United States would do would be standoff engagements. So you would see the United States launching cruise missiles. They would launch small diameter bombs hundreds of miles from Moscow. So the idea that the Russians would be shooting down F-35s approaching Moscow is rather unlikely. And what you would most likely see is this air defense network shooting down approaching cruise missiles and other systems. Highly, highly doubtful you would see that take place. And I think the only time you would probably see U.S. aircraft approach within 100 miles of Moscow was if either side was starting to take down the global positioning networks of either side. And then obviously you're looking at World War, when either side is starting to shoot down GPS systems, meaning the U.S. is trying to take down GLONASS, or the Russians are trying to take down GPS. And in all probability, if shooting starts, you can expect that to happen. If World War III were to break out, you could expect the Russians to try to take down GPS, and then you would see the United States try to take down GLONASS, and that would have ramifications just way beyond the military scope of what's happening. It would affect you, the viewer, if you're here in the United States. If you are in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and GPS starts to get taken down by the Russians or the Chinese, that is going to impact you. Not just military activities. It's going to impact financial markets. It's going to impact many, many things. Just not you driving from point A to point B or finding a locale instead of using a map. But in regards to that question, how would NATO aircraft fare against this very robust Russian air defense network? Again, I think you have this belief that American F-35s or B-2s or what have you would be flying over a target, right? That's not going to happen. They're going to launch from hundreds of miles away, and they're going to try and saturate that target with stealthy cruise missiles, and then is it possible that the Russians could shoot those cruise missiles down? Difficult to say. Obviously, we've seen Russian targets get hit. We've seen the Russian naval vessel, the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, which essentially was armed with S-300s as well. And we can go back and forth on that one. Was the ship actively using its radar? Was it not using its radar? Why would it be there in that locale if it wasn't operating its radar? Why wasn't it acting as a air defense system for the Russian fleet? And obviously couldn't even defend itself. And if you want to take the position that something happened on the ship that it wasn't pertaining directly to a Ukrainian missile strike or drone strike, that's even worse. I mean, think about that for a second. The Russian flagship of the Black Sea sunk itself because of an accident? I just not buying it. I believe it was hit. Now, whether its radar was being used improperly or it was just in a state of disrepair, I don't know. But be it as it may, it was armed with the naval version of the S-300 and other medium-range systems as well, and it wasn't able to defend. It's sitting at the bottom of the sea right now, so it doesn't really matter. But again, you can see the varying levels of air defenses. So in some places, the U.S., if they were going after the Russians, it wouldn't be as difficult because the air defense network isn't as robust. So the air defense network around the Russian Federation just is not the same in different parts of Russia. Obviously, here to the north, the U.S. could gain entry over the poles and attack from the north. But again, those U.S. weapon systems that would be launched against targets in Russia, they would be engaged by those Russian air defense systems in all probability. So it then really comes down to who has more missiles. Does the U.S. expend hundreds, if not thousands, of missiles on targets near Moscow? And then how many cruise missiles does the United States have? How many air defense missiles does Russia have? And who's going to win out? Is the U.S. going to degrade the ability of the Russians to produce air defense weapon systems? Hard to say. We just don't know yet. In other places, if you go over to Kaliningrad, very robust air defense network, that in all probability would be shooting down aircraft over Poland, deep inside of Poland. You got two different air defense. You have the 183 with 4 battalions of S-400s, and then 2 battalions of S-300s, and then unknown with at least 24 S-300 V4s. And we know that there was at least one case where an S-400, in all probability, shot down a maneuvering Ukrainian Su-27 over Kiev. In all probability, that shot was taken either in Belarus or in far northeastern Ukraine. But it was able to do it. We know that. And it killed the pilot in the Ukrainian Su-27. The S-400, S-300, they have very large warheads. If the pilot is unaware that it's about to be hit and that S-400 detonates, especially the larger, longer range version of the S-400, it's going to kill the pilot outright because of the size of the warhead and depending on the proximity of the detonation. Very, very large warhead. I mean, the warheads are big enough where they can be used against ground targets and are being actively used against ground targets inside of Ukraine. So again, as you compare and contrast U.S. Air Force against Russia, it's very difficult to say. There's other issues that are going to come into play too. Are the Russians able to go after U.S. air bases or where U.S. is launching its aircraft? You have other issues too. A lot of the attacks that would take place against Russia would not be aircraft. The U.S. would not use necessarily aircraft. It would use long-range cruise missiles launched from submarines in different locales. You would probably see U.S. submarines enter areas near the Baltic if they were able to operate with confidence near the Baltic Sea. If they were able to eliminate Russian subsurface threats in the Baltic, and they were confident enough to operate in the Baltic Sea, probably see that. In other places as well, you would see attacks in the north by U.S. subsurface warfare assets. surface warfare assets as well. At the same time, you would see the Russians using its subsurface assets, its surface warfare assets as well. So again, this would be a multi-domain war. It would just not be the U.S. Air Force versus the Russian air defense network. A lot of other factors would come into play at a certain point. But in the end, I mean, obviously the U.S. Air Force is incredibly large, and depending on ready available cruise missiles and long-range precision-guided munitions, that would be the deciding factors. Who eventually runs out of missiles to counter its adversary. And then once that happens, and if that happens, and the other side has remaining missile systems, then it would put the other side at a distinct disadvantage. But the Russians do have the capability to reach out, hit targets in Germany, hit targets in Poland. They have the ability to hit targets in the U.K. It's very probable that the U.S. mainland could become the target of a cruise missile attack by Russian subsurface warfare assets. We know that a Russian nuclear attack boat tracked a U.S. carrier in the Gulf of Mexico. Russian subsurface threats have been detected in the Gulf of Mexico. They've operated there. So to say that we possibly couldn't see some sort of cruise missile strike against maybe Whiteman Air Base, Air Force Base in Missouri, or just some sort of a statement of attack by the Russians against a target in the United States, I'd say is highly probable, especially if World War III starts. You can't rule it out. But again, just wanted to have a look at this, give you, the viewer, kind of an idea of what the Russian air defense network looks like. You know, again, while especially robust near Moscow, it doesn't look the same throughout the Russian Federation. Obviously, they're protecting various targets because it is such a large nation state. But we'll have more content very soon. Thank you for joining us today. Have a good day.